Hello everyone and welcome back. This week we're continuing the series through which we are looking at different Beatles albums and their variations, especially on CD but also on vinyl, checking out how different releases look, what contents they have, and to a certain extent how they sound. In the second episode we'll be looking at the second studio album from the Beatles, released first on the 22nd of November 1963, entitled With the Beatles. So if you're curious to see what versions we have for you today, stick around. Now, in terms of variations that we're going to be looking at today, with vinyl, I only have one version, one pressing of the With the Beatles album. But on CD, we have several to look at today. So we have the original release from the late 80s, early 90s. That was in mono. We have the mono and stereo variations from 2009 as part of the respective box sets. We have another sort of pirate version from Russia, which I will show as well. And I also thought that it would be a good idea for us to look at how this album was released initially in the US through its CD versions, this time from 2014 from the box set, specifically through the two albums that took songs from With the Beatles, which were Meet the Beatles and the Beatles' second album. After presenting all of these and looking at the contents near the end, as we did with Please Please Me, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how these sound to me, and specifically just targeting a few songs and telling you which I think are the best sounding versions from me from all of the variations that I have. And this will also include, besides the ones that I mentioned, some of the compilation albums, because I feel like some of the songs on these albums, on these versions, CD or vinyl, sound actually a little bit better on some of the compilations. Now, let's start with the vinyl itself, because I said that I only have the one pressing, which is this one, a Dutch pressing. I showed it briefly before as part of the unboxing and presentation video for the BC13 box set, the Beatles collection that I have from the Netherlands. Now, it is difficult, and this will be the case for many of the pressings from that box, which is it's a bit difficult to figure out exactly the year of this pressing. So even if you look with the matrix on Discogs, you'll find that there is no year for some of the variations of this album that contain that matrix. Actually, what is interesting is that the matrix that I found for With the Beatles matches the version from 1969, so one of the earlier pressings, earlier in respect to when the box set was released for this album, but it's most probably not an album from that year because it was repressed and re-released across the 70s. So this is more probably something from the late 70s, early 80s. For Please Please Me, it was easier for me to say that it was from probably 77, 78, but for this one and some of the following ones, it's going to be more difficult. But, as a range, most probably late 70s, early 80s. Now, this one was reproduced quite nicely. For me, I mentioned, I think before, that I really like that the front cover, as opposed to some others, especially the ones on CD, can actually see their faces, even where you have the more, the darker side of the picture, you can actually see their faces, which is a nice, a little bit of a nice difference versus what we have on the CD covers, especially. The back reproduces the UK original cover down to the Emitex logo and all of that. So quite well reproduced based on the UK version, of course. And just take a little look at the disc as well. I'm keeping it in this black poly inner sleeve. The original one I don't have, and the one that I had with the disc when I got the box set was just plain paper. Didn't look that good. So you see we have this silver on black Parlophone label that was used in the 70s, early 80s, which looks nice enough. The disc was in pretty good condition versus some of the others in the box set. I feel like it is a very good plus. It does have some hairline scratches, it does have some background noise, but I have to say that it sounds quite good. That is why, it's one of the reasons why I didn't seek to replace this one as I did with others. But I have been told by talking with a collector from Romania actually that has one of the recent pressings from 2012, that even the recent pressing of this one sounds quite good, even compared to the older pressings, right, or more original pressings from the 60s and 70s. Otherwise, not much to say. To me, it sounds quite good. We'll talk about the sound anyway near the end. This was the only vinyl pressing of With the Beatles that I have. Now, the other vinyl that I have here that we're going to be referencing today, just a little bit at the end when it comes to sound, is the first disc from the Beatles Box from Liverpool box set. Basically, one of the compilation discs that were included in that box set. I wanted to include this because I do like how some of these songs sound on here, as opposed to the vinyl pressing that I have of With the Beatles. And we will be talking about that near the end. So I wanted to show this as well because we're going to be referencing it. As opposed to many other fans, I do like the presentation on this box. What I don't like is kind of the resolution, if you will, or anyway, the quality of the pictures that they use, because they didn't look too good. But I do find the presentation interesting, you know, with this mock wrapping paper that they use, and you'll see each disc has a different one. And the back where they have the specific liner notes along with the track listing. And so for this one, the second side has the songs that are taken from With the Beatles, and we're going to be checking out some of them today. And of course, the first side contains the songs mostly from Please Please Me, and like I said, we have these interesting liner notes from Hugh Marshall from 1980. Let's see the disc on this one as well. I like the label on this one more because it's one of the let's say more classical labels that were used in the 1970s and 80s, I think mostly 1980s, for the Beatles releases on Parlophone, which is again a silver on black, but this time with the rectangle Parlophone with those lines that are crossing it. You know, it's a fuller label, kind of like it more than the other one on With the Beatles. And yeah, like I said, this disc to me, even with some surface noise, sounded pretty good. And it has also the original inner sleeve, which you can see here, with all of the dates and the elements printed there on the bottom. Quite nice inner sleeve as well. Now, on with the CDs. We're going to start with the original release of With the Beatles on CD, which was in mono. In 1987, of course. This one is a repress from around 1992, but it's still the same album, the same level of, let's say, quality, and basically the same version of the tracks. You can see it has the mono text here, along with the AAD acronym. And that one, I read it the last time as well. It refers to the analog source that was used up until the point where this was put on the digital format for the CD itself. Now, just opening this up, again, the classic now, let's say, CD look from the late 80s and early 90s. The track listing, of course, on the back and with the barcode, as well as the Apple logo here on the bottom and the Parlophone logo here. And of course the booklet that we're going to be looking at a little bit as well, as we did for Please Please Me. Now the booklet, as with Please Please Me, that actually reproduces the some of the text from the vinyl release, the original vinyl release, along with these you know, very zoomed in headshots, the Beatles, the track listing as well. And then you have the liner notes that existed on the original vinyl release, which are reproduced here. Again, I don't like how these were printed, to be honest. It seems like they were printed, you know, wasn't really thought out. The alignment, way that they are kind of overly over-centered, but they're starting way too much on the top, I think. I don't know, the person who did the design for this did not think it through properly, I think. And then the details about the CD You know, also what ADD, AAD mean and so on. So Tony Barrow notes. And that's about it for this one. Again, I have to say that this one sounds quite good, but we'll talk near the end about it. But let's talk a little bit about also this sort of Russian unofficial release. Again, like we did with Please Please Me. These are the only two albums where I have these. This was again a reproduction of that the Russians made after a Japanese release of this album. We're going to take out the booklet as well for this one because it's a little bit more you know, inclusive, this booklet, versus the original release one. That's how the Japanese made it, and so the Russians copied that almost perfectly, let's say. The disc itself, the sound I'll talk about near the end, but obviously it's disappointing, but the disc is the Apple label, apparently how it was with Japan. Of course, you are missing the barcode on the back, this being an unofficial release, but you also have the Parlophone and the Apple there as well. Now, let's look at the booklet. It's a very decent reproduction. Of course, the resolution is a little bit off, probably versus the original. I don't know, because I don't have the original Japanese one, but still, you know. But again, with this is similar to the original one from the 80s and 90s. So with the headshots, you know, the zoom in cuts from the original picture of the Beatles, with Tony Barrow's notes being displayed, but then you are starting again with the lyrics of the songs in both English and Japanese, right? Which is, again, a nice touch. And that goes until the end, with Ringo closing the booklet. So these are the original CD release in mono, and this sort of stereo Russian bootleg, if you will, of copy. Closing in with the more recent releases of With the Beatles. One of the best ones that exists there on CD, obviously, is the mono version on this vinyl replica from the mono box set of 2009, of course. This is nice also because the cover is glossy on the front. Of course, it reproduces the back, the flips on the back, right, along with the original back cover of the mono album. Of course, inside, as with Please Please Me, and as shown previously on this channel, you have a replica of the inner sleeve with the text and everything, and the nice looking disc in this poly sleeve, Japanese style inner sleeve. You know, the disc with the black, the yellow on black Parlophone label. Let's take it out for you guys to see it better, as if you haven't seen this a few times at least, but still, you know, quite nice looking. And let's take a look at the stereo one in the digipack. Again, you've seen it on the channel before, right? So we're not going to spend too much time, but just going through it a little bit. The front, of course, it's a replica of the front of the album, but we have this band here that is part of all of the digipacks. The track listing on the back with this picture of the Beatles, barcode, all of the stuff, you know. And then what is nice about the digipacks, the fold-out inner with the extra pictures. Of course, the booklet, nice glossy booklet as well. This, of course, will contain, again, the original liner notes from Tony Barrow, along, you know, intersected with some nice pictures. This one was from the session that was used also for the front covers of the Live at the BBC. So some additional notes, historical notes with additional pictures. And then some recording notes as well. Exactly like in the Please Please Me. Ending with some credits. So clearly a more consistent booklet than the original ones. Both of those, of course, were released in 2009, each of them part of their respective box sets that I actually have behind me, the mono and the stereo. But of course, the stereo ones were also released separately and still are being released to this day, or being sold to this day as the let's say, current version on CD for the Beatles albums in stereo. Now, these were the With the Beatles albums from the collection, along with the first disc from the Beatles Box from Liverpool on vinyl. But let's take a look also at the versions of this album, or let's say the songs that were part of With the Beatles, in the way that they were released in the US on Capitol. And the way that they did that is, of course, through, first of all, Meet the Beatles, which was their first album as released by Capitol in the US. They imported the picture as well, although this one has a bluish tint versus the original UK one, which was quite a very striking black and white contrast. And also they changed the title from With the Beatles to Meet the Beatles, but also they added more color to it. They made it bigger, sort of to appeal to the US market, I guess. And this is the reproduction of the album on CD for the Beatles in the US Albums box set, which we also showed here on the channel before. This is nice because, like with the mono box set on the CD from 2009, this was released in 2014, they reproduced the covers quite nicely of the original discs, but at least for the stereo one. But what I don't like is the cardboard, although it's very sturdy, and that's a good thing. You know, it's not glossy, so the aspect of it is a little bit, I wouldn't say maybe cheaper, maybe. I'm not sure if this was how the albums were released back then, so to be honest, I'm not sure if they're actually being faithful to the reproduction. But the rest of the things are exactly like they were for the mono box set, in that they included, of course, the inner sleeve, and the ones from Capitol, I have to say, at least compared to the Beatles ones, they were nicer looking with these sort of commercials of other albums that they, Capitol was releasing at the time. Now, them not being, having any poly inner, makes them less usable for CDs, but still. But the disc itself is in a poly inner sleeve. And here again, they reproduced the original label, right, of the Capitol album. Now, what I have to say is that this version, maybe the eagle-eyed of you have noticed, is not actually, or this disc that I hold in my hand is not actually the one from 2014, I think. Because when I bought the box set, I had some problems with some of the discs. This was not one of them initially. It was playing fine, but after a second check, it started to skip on some of the songs, so I had to get a replacement. The problem is, very difficult to get a replacement for this one at a decent price. So what I did, because I'm not, necessarily a big fan of the US albums, I like to have some version of them in my collection, just because they are interesting pieces. It's interesting to see how the track lists were built and the design was built for the US market. But I will not be listening to them primarily. I'm listening to the original albums more. And so I wanted to replace this as in a cheaper way, but without getting any bootleg. So what I did is I got and I think I said this on the channel before, I got the Beatles Capitol Albums box set #1, the one with the first 4 albums, and I replaced the Meet the Beatles one that was kind of skipping with that one. It still has both the mono and the stereo as the 2014 one, but of course, the versions of the songs that were used in there, the remasters and so on, are different on the 2006 Capitol, or I think 2006 it was, Capitol Albums versus the 2014 US Albums box set version. But still, it's okay for me. They sounded fine, and I got to have a working CD replacement for this. Now, normally I would have included just, the Meet the Beatles album, but this was released in January of 1964 in the US. But then a few months later in April, they released the second album, which they aptly titled the Beatles' second album. Now this one that I have in here is the version from the Beatles US Albums box set. And I wanted to include it as well because technically, if we want to talk about With the Beatles and the songs on that album, they were not included all on the Meet the Beatles. Of course, Meet the Beatles included notably 3 songs that were not on the original album, that were basically released through singles, 2 of them, and 1 of them in the UK was released on Please Please Me, but that were great songs, and actually they make Meet the Beatles a pretty strong album, I think. A lot of people think it has a stronger track listing than the original with the Beatles. And they may be right. So those songs were I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Saw Her Standing There, which was coming from Please Please Me, and This Boy, and they do sound good. Now, the rest of the songs from With the Beatles that were not included on Meet the Beatles were included on this Beatles second album. So that's why I thought, it's appropriate to look at it as well. Not going to open it all together. It still has the Capitol label inside, inner sleeve, and so on. So that's going to be quite similar. When it comes to comparing these between them and talking about maybe each of them specifically, I have to say that the biggest differences that I got to notice while listening to them was that some of these are pressed or cut louder or lower in volume, and that some of them are more on the treble side and some of them are more bassy and punchy. And what you always kind of look for is a nice balance between the two. I always also kind of tend to play a little bit with the settings on my system because I do want to get the sound that I want. So sometimes, even if something is a little bit more trebly, so for instance, like I was talking about this before, that these discs from the Beatles Box from Liverpool, they're all, they contain a little bit more tracks on each side than a normal Beatles album. And so, they seem to be cut, although cut very well, they seem to be cut with a little less bass. I think that might have been deliberate to kind of be able to include them. They are Harry Moss cuts, so then, they are quality. If I push the bass up a little bit on the system, these sound so good, so excellent, that I have to say, I have no problem when a certain album or disc is cut with the bass a little bit lower, because you can tweak it a little bit and get to what you want to get in terms of sound. Of course, it's better if it's there naturally, but still, for me, the reproduction was quite good. And in that sense, I have to say that vinyl overall, both of them, but even with the Beatles one from Netherlands, although it's sounding good, it's sounding quite full, it's a little bit less bassy, if I can say so, than the stereo on CD pressing from 2009, and even then the mono one. So I have to say the mono and stereo CDs from 2009 are both a little bit louder, and in terms of bass, in terms of let's say the thickness of the sound, they are definitely on top of the vinyl pressings, both the Dutch pressing that I have here, but also the disc from the box from Liverpool. And at the same time, they are a bit louder even than the 87 CD, and also a little bit bassier, if I can say so. The thinnest of them all seems again to be this Russian bootleg or reproduction of the Japanese CD, which, it's not only with more treble and less bass, but it also seems thinner in terms of sound and lower. And it seems like there's a veil, like it was with the Please Please Me, like there's a veil over the sound. And so that it doesn't sound too good. Even if you kind of tweak the settings on your system, still seems like it's missing something. And to top it off, this sort of Russian bootleg also seems to have more distortion on certain tracks than all of the others. And so, yeah, for that reason alone, I had to disconsider it for most of the listening experience. Now, let's talk about some of the songs specifically. So, let's take All My Lovin', for instance. That one, by comparing all of these, to me, the one that sounded the best, it was on the Dutch pressing. Now, I'm pretty sure that if I would have had on my hands like an earlier UK pressing, or even the most recent one from 2012, maybe I would have chosen one of those ones, who knows. But to me, on this one, it sounded a little bit better. In the end, the vocals sounded a little bit better, because All My Loving to me always had this little bit of distortion on every version that I listened to. Sometimes it gets to be a loud song, so maybe it's also because of the source of the original song or tape that was used. But to me, here on this vinyl version, it kind of sounded a little bit better. For Don't Bother Me, for instance, George's song, it's interesting that by listening to it on all of the versions, on all of these CDs, couldn't make a choice. Really, I could not make a choice. For All I Gotta Do, which is another interesting case, actually it seemed to me like the version on Meet the Beatles sounded better. And then I realized that, again, this is not the one from 2014, so it definitely does not use the remasters from 2009, which some of these discs do. So, you know, it was interesting to me that at least that song, Don't Bother Me, to me sounded, All I Gotta Do, to me sounded better on actually the US version of the album. One song that I really, really love is one of the covers that they have on this album, which is Still There With You. And for that one, it seemed to me like the vinyl sounded quite good. It sounds quite clean, and it's a full sound, you know, and the vinyl itself, I have to say, it does have some surface noise because of the usage, but versus the Please Please Me one from Dutch Collection, this one is much cleaner and sounds much better from that perspective. But I did find the stereo and mono versions to kind of be slightly better than what we have on here, and I would definitely think that I would prefer the one on the mono CD version of 2009. Another song that I like, which is another cover, is the one sung by George, Roll Over Beethoven. And for this one, it was very difficult for me to decide which version sounded maybe marginally better. And the two ones that I was listening to more to decide were the stereo on the Dutch pressing on vinyl, and then the 2009 stereo CD. Just a very little edge to this CD, maybe just a little bit more clarity to the sound, but it was very marginal. So again, one that was very difficult for me to make a choice. They sounded very, very similar, to be honest. And just one more song, It Won't Be Long. I wanted to mention this because it was interesting to me. Comparing between all of these versions, what came on top for me was the sound on this first disc of the Beatles Box. So I just thought it sounded a little bit better. Again, the sound here is a little bit on the trebly side, with a small adjustment, or medium adjustment to the bass. To me, this sounded perfect. And it's just so ever slightly topped what I got from all of the other sources, or at least for my ears. Okay, so to try to conclude, this one was a little bit harder than with Please Please Me. With Please Please Me on vinyl, I kind of knew that that German pressing would come on top. As I was listening, I realized that. With the 2012 one coming in close second, being quite good and surprising given the bad rep that it's gotten. Here it was a little bit more difficult. In terms of clarity of sound, to be honest, I do feel like the CDs are coming on top, and it's not the metallic clarity, or how people are calling it, like cold clarity of sound. They actually sound really good to me. Maybe again the pressing that I have is not that good, but if I were to choose, of course I don't have different versions. I cannot choose between different versions of vinyl. I do think that some of the songs do sound a little bit better on this Beatles Box disc 1, but this is a pretty good pressing. This Dutch pressing of With the Beatles, it's something that I would recommend. It sounds quite good. If I were to choose from the CDs, again, it's between the mono and the stereo of 2009, and I do think that my previous experience listening to them in headphones brought the mono just slightly on top. So maybe if I were to make a preference from everything that I have here, with the vinyl it's difficult to choose because I don't have another exact pressing, so we'll have to stick with this one. And on the CDs, it's a very tight fight between the mono and the stereo of 2009, but the mono comes slightly on top. Now, that doesn't mean that this 87 mono CD is bad, far from it. And often, for many of the songs, it's so close to the others, and only the volume was kind of making slightly the difference, but otherwise it sounded quite good. So if you have it, enjoy it. It is a good version, no matter what anyone else says. Now, before I close, I do want to give another shout out to these US versions of these albums. So both the Meet the Beatles one, which in this case, like I mentioned, is not from the 2014 box set, but rather from the 2004 Capitol Albums Volume 1. I think I said earlier 2006, it's 2004, I stand corrected. And then the second Beatles second album, which this one is from the 2014 box set. And I felt like both of them sounded quite good. And with the Meet the Beatles especially, I understand why the Beatles fans from the US would be a lot more attached to this one. First of all, because it was the one, you know, mainly released in the US, even after the UK one started coming in, I guess. But also because it does have a pretty good track listing, right? And the inclusion of I Wanna Hold Your Hand, This Boy and I Saw Her Standing There definitely elevate the track listing and the value of this release as an album. But they both sound quite good, even given that they are from different years releases and different sources for the material that was put on them. And so, yeah, I just couldn't find a fault to them. They're pretty great. Now, this wraps it up for today. Please do let us know in the comments which versions of With the Beatles you have, and if you have multiple, like in our case, or even more than these, especially on vinyl, which ones do you find to be the better sounding ones? Of course, it's all very personal and subjective, but some of the things I think are quite objective, which is, for instance, that the mono version from 2009 sounds quite good. You know, that this is an album that can sound pretty good in stereo if you find the right mix. So yeah, please let us know in the comments what you think, which are the versions that you prefer listening to. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope we'll see you next time.